Welcome back to the BookEnds YouTube channel. Today we are talking about R&Rs. So, as agents, go ahead.
Which means revise and resubmit. So if
Yes.
you're not familiar with the term R&R, it means revise and resubmit. And on occasion, but I will preface that with don't expect them, don't count on them. An agent or an editor might like your material enough to respond with a request that you make revisions based on their comments and resubmit it.
Yeah. First thing to know, this is not a guarantee. This is like the same odds, right? You rewrite portions of the book, you send it back, and you kind of like sending a new submission, and hopefully it works out. At least that's what we tell clients when we get them from the editor side of things, which we have been seeing a lot lately, which is leading us to do this video.
I have,
Um,
I have to say, historically, I think R&Rs are pretty new to the business, and I think they started to happen because of the ability to submit so quickly. Back, when authors would have to actually print out a manuscript and snail mail it to an agent, I think R&Rs happened less often. Um, I do think, when I defined R&Rs at the beginning, I'll be honest, as of a couple of years ago, I had never heard the term R&R. Like that's how uncommon they were. So I think it's very new to the business.
and
And I
now they are everywhere.
Yeah, and I mean, we have some opinions on it, but I think at the end of the day, I'm happy to say I'm not so thrilled with them. I think sometimes they are a detriment to the author, which is part of what we're going to discuss here.
Yeah, so they're often it's free work, which is where our 5 tips or 5 suggestions on things you should do before you actually start an R&R. It's where
Or
they come
consider it,
from,
or even consider it, I
or
think.
even consider it. Yeah, our goal is to help you mitigate something that's not right for your career, help you offset doing free work or the wrong free work. So 5 things to do. Number one, the first thing you should do when you get an R&R is just sit with the feedback. And I think when you're querying and you get a response from an agent, no matter what, it's like that little bit of a rush. And when you get a more like something that feels positive, like an R&R or a request, it's like immediate. You want to do it. I
Yeah.
think once you get that feedback where it says, "Hey, I like this, but this would need work," you just stop. Like read it, sit with it. You have to really think about whether you can incorporate this feedback into your manuscript, whether it aligns with your vision. It's going to make the book stronger in your eyes. All of these things are crucial before you even start putting pen to paper to really sit with and think about because it's most likely not going to be a little bit of work.
In fact, that's suggestions I would give on any feedback, any revisions, whether it's beta readers, critique partners, your agent, or your editor, even when the revisions are part of the process, as they are with all of those things, is that I think it's really important to take a few days, even a week, to really sit and process the feedback, maybe even take notes, maybe journal on it. I'm a big fan of journaling my thoughts. I find that it really helps me, but when I'm giving revisions to my clients, I'll often sit on it for a few days myself, like the weekend, let's say I
Yeah,
finish
for
my
sure.
notes. I write them all out on Friday, and then I sit on my notes before sending to the author to really think about what I just read, whether my notes are thorough, whether it's important. And I think that so I think sitting with feedback when you get anything on your book is important to process it.
Yeah, it's just seeing whether it resonates, but I would also argue seeing whether the way you got the feedback resonates is important too, because this is a sneak peek into what an editorial relationship with that agent will look like.
Yeah.
So it's important to know, like, was it detailed feedback? Was it feedback that felt like, I don't know, there's so much when you're reading that, is that how you want to work with your agent in the future? Because I think an R&R is a good example of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The second thing you should do is consider where you are. Consider where you are in your writing career, in your querying process, in your drafting process of your next book. And I think, Jessica, you said this when we were planning this video, but do you want to go back into this last project that you were working on? Does it make sense for whatever juncture you're at for you to do that?
Yeah, and I think part of that is, does the feedback make sense for you? Because you can get feedback, but if you're sitting there thinking about it and thinking, I don't really get what they want, then it's probably not the right feedback for you to go back to that book with. I also think there's a part of this, consider where you are now. Let's say you've already queried 30 agents.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of your writing and you're submitting, there's probably about 50 agents, maybe 100 who are really, I mean, there are a lot of agents out there, but when you look at your book and your career, there's probably about 50 to 100 that you could actually work with. If you've already queried, let's say 50 of them, and this is a bit of feedback, I guess I would say, is it really going to be enough for you to take and run with? That's up to you. But
Yeah. I mean, and I think it depends on the author and it depends on, I think, because you can make the case to not do it in either way, right?
yep,
Like you
that's
could have
right.
just sent out your first queries, got an R&R and said it's so early. Or you can say, this feedback really resonated. It's early enough that I should make those changes because if it's not right for this, it might be right for one of the, like there's so many different ways to approach this. It depends on the feedback, like you're saying. Does it really resonate? And then you go to this next step of, okay, where am I at? Does it make sense? That's
And
like the two-step process.
And I think it's perfectly acceptable to say, I put this book out in submission. I felt good about it. I'm going to see what
Yeah,
happens because now I am knee deep in something new that I'm loving. And I could instead take that feedback and instead of trying to rework the book I've presumably revised and edited already a few times,
right.
what would be better for me is instead of going back to the kitchen with the same cake mix, taking that feedback and saying, okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. I can see where that might have been a problem. Let me incorporate into this fresh book that I'm writing so I don't make that same mistake. And sometimes that can be easier. I think that's the harder choice for the author, but I also think sometimes, actually, I personally think often that's the better choice.
Yeah,
That's me.
that makes sense. Well, I think what you said is really important. You put the book out on submission for a reason. So this really has to convince you in one way or another. I think too, going into our third thing is you put this book out on, hopefully you put this book out on submission kind of with a community, right? Like you have
Yeah.
your writing partners or your critique group or whatever who have also read it and have helped you get it to a place where you feel really confident in it. Those are the people you should go back to when you get this R&R. Those are the
Yeah.
people you should share the R&R with and ask their feedback on and brainstorm, talk it out, see if it makes sense to other people too, because sometimes, again, the querying process is so emotional and emotion filled that we might just be like, run at it, try and get this thing. That's the goal. But having other people say, well, that doesn't really make sense for the book or for the character, or that's not your goal, or that's not what you wrote this for. Having other people that can weigh in and talk you through it. We do it all the time when we have a sticky situation, a sticky edit, a sticky negotiation practice. Like we talk to each other and we talk it out and try and figure it out. I think this is the best thing to do
Yeah.
after when you're still deciding, am I going to do it or not? Talk to the people that have who were there when you wrote the book.
Yeah. I also think something that's really important is that if I'm out personally asking for an R&R, which I mean, once every 3 to 5 years, I ask for an R&R. It's not something I do. If I'm
Right.
personally asking for an R&R, it's not as simple typically. Like if I say characters aren't working, it's not as simple as fixing a few things. If it was as simple as fixing a few things, I would have offered representation and thought this is something we can work on together. So I think you really need to look at the big picture. And if there's an R&R that's requested, it probably means the entire book needs a redo with some of that information in mind. And that's where I'm going back and forth all over the place here, but I think that's really something that's worth considering. Do you want to put what you're currently writing aside for possibly another 6 months to go back to that first thing that's already been on submission? Or would you make more progress? I guess what's your goal? Is your goal to publish that one book? Is your goal to build a career? Because I guess what I would say is maybe putting that feedback in the book and having something new ready in 6 months for submission instead of adding another 6 months to that other thing might be more productive and is worth considering in the grand scheme.
Yeah. Yeah. And it all depends on what the feedback is too.
Yeah. Yeah, I should
I
probably preface this whole thing that I'm not always I don't usually feel like an R&R is the best move for an author. So all of
agree.
my feedback here has a little of that edge to it.
Yeah, I agree. I also think as agents, we don't often do them. I think I've done a total of one, and then I ended up passing and I felt awful, and I resolved
Yeah.
myself to never do it again because it's just not, to me, I don't feel like it's a good use of someone else's time, and I don't want to feel that way again when I pass on it. But I think it is really worth considering, like, how that feedback comes across, what that feedback is, and whether it clicks. Sometimes it clicks and go for it and great and cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good luck.
Yeah.
Um, the fourth thing that you should be considering is that the right agent?
Right.
Because, when we query, we don't always query just our top list of agents, right? You might have other agents in there, people who haven't seen your work yet. You just might not feel like that is the agent you want to do the R&R for. And
Right.
that's fine. That's totally okay. You still have the feedback. You can always go back to it in the future. You can always make the revisions if you wanted to. But do you want to do the R&R for that agent is something very important that you should be
Yeah,
considering.
definitely. Because that's a lot of work that you're going to be doing for one agent to take a second look.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. So, if all four of these things are things that you have answered yes to, so you're going to do this R&R or you want to do this R&R, I believe you should ask the agent for a call. And I believe that any agent who has asked you to invest your free labor into revising the book should invest a little time, get on a call, talk through it, meet a little bit, and maybe if you have suggestions, I mean, have ideas and brainstorms, talk through those a little bit too. I think that's a very rational, reasonable give and take here. And I think the answer to that could be very telling.
Oh, I was going to say very telling because I think if an agent's asking you to do additional work so that they can reconsider your book, I think it's fair to ask them for the time to get on a phone call. And I think if
Right.
an agent is not open to that, I would question how sincere they are about wanting to take a second look at your book
Yep.
versus just giving some suggestions as to why they rejected it and wanting to move on, because that's a possibility too. But also, are you willing to work with an agent who's not, doesn't want to get on that call? Because, you know, I would want to work with an agent who wants to
Right,
get on
right.
the call.
It's all right there. Like it's really the most telling. I think it's the most important thing because it
Yeah,
really will tell you a whole lot about what is worth it right
yeah,
now. So,
absolutely.
and if all these things go well and you're going to do the R&R, get to work.
Yeah.
Read, make sure
Or
you're
if you're
reading your
not, go
mentor
back to your
text.
other book and just keep plowing away.
Exactly. We hope this was helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you back here next time.